Video game genres of all shapes and sizes have traits and tropes that have become commonplace, to such an extent that there's an inclination to rely on these ideas before anything else. In the world of video games, you simply have to push boundaries. There's this constant struggle going on to try and be the next great innovator. Actually, I'm not sure there is. That line just sounded good in my head. If anything, there's a tendency to forgo new ideas for tried and tested ones that are more likely to ship copies of games due to fans being familiar with them, leaving new innovations on the shelf for being different and therefore weird. And while I can't really fault the business model, I'm not such a big fan of sticking a cork in the creativity machine. Probably better ways of phrasing that. Makes it sound like the creativity machine would explode. After all, we remember the little things the most. We can chow down on our yearly release of whatever AAA franchises align with current trends, but they're not as likely to leave an impression on us as something with a bit more creativity put into it. And when you see a game mechanic that crops up in a game that gets you smiling, you start to yearn for its inclusion in other games. That's really what this video is. These aren't the 5 most unique mechanics ever put into a video game, but if I was writing my wish list, we could do some of these again. It won't make them unique, but that's a compromise I'm willing to make. I'll take one for the team. A lot of effort goes into the construction of a video game world. You need to strike a balance between a feeling of it being lived in while still making sure that the player can navigate around it without too much trouble. Basically, it's the constant struggle between trying not to seem too much like a video game and still being a video game. So you might make your overworld vast and potentially confusing, but that's okay, because as long as you've got some basic orienteering skills, you can just read the map the game gives you. But if you're a true adventurer, you wouldn't just read this map. I'm not saying you need your nose buried deep in a map to feel like an adventurer, but if you want to give something back, you need to have some interactivity with the map. And while you might have some fast travel options and some extra info about locations, you could always add more. Do you remember drawing treasure maps as a kid? Not a lot of games have really tried to let you draw your own world map. Mainly because that's a potentially horrendous idea considering how tricky cartography is, but leave it to Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks of all games to strike up a compromise. In these games you don't have to draw out a map, very often at least, but it is quite helpful for you to make notes on the map as you travel the overworld and through dungeons. Usually just little things like the order you need to hit switches or the symbols needed to fast travel around the world, but it's the perfect way to keep track of small tidbits of information. It kinda takes me back to the video game manuals that had room in the back if you wanted to take down some notes. I mean, no one ever used them, but I think this would be a winner. Of course, not every game is on the 3DS, but, you know, I'm just an ideas man. Leave the practicality for the experts. Video game franchises don't change genres very often. It's quite a shaky idea really, because you could alienate loads of fans if you change a lot from game to game, but it could work out in the end. You could be following a trend at the right time and ride a wave of success into the sunset or something, but I think what I'm trying to say is that Fallout hasn't always been a shooter franchise. There was 10 years between Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, and in that time, the series managed to go from a role-playing game to what Wikipedia calls an action role-playing game. Or in simpler terms, a shooter game with a few elements left over from when the series was focused on being an RPG. I mean, that's perfectly fine, since I doubt the franchise would have gotten the plaudits that it did if it stayed as an RPG with turn-based combat, but there's still a certain amount of tucking your origins under the rug so that no one acknowledges that it ever happened. But we can still make compromises, can't we? We don't have to abolish all uses of random chance. V.A.T.S is the perfect middle ground between the skill behind a shooter and the luck that affects the turn-based combat in an RPG. If you want, you can just play Fallout 3 and beyond like a traditional shooter and simply fill everything that moves with as many bullets or lasers as you can, but if you find that your thumbs become vastly unresponsive anytime they go near control sticks or a computer mouse, then V.A.T.S is here to save the day. Instead of having to worry about manual aiming, with the press of a button you can pause real-time combat and pick which area of the enemy you want to hit. The highest it can go is 95%, so there's always a random aspect about it, but you can augment your chance with certain perks. It's not something I ever found myself relying on too much, but it's pretty helpful if combat gets a little too crazy. Again, not so sure how you'd implement something like this in another game, especially since this system is a defining feature of Fallout games, but maybe you could take a more luck-based stance on gun-based combat. You know, leveling the playing field, making it more accessible for everyone. It'll fly off the shelves, trust me. You can't measure emotions. I mean, you kinda can. Strap someone to a heart rate monitor and you can get a read on how scared someone is. Whip out a decibel meter and you can measure screams, either of fear or of excitement. But how do you measure slightly more abstract emotions or states? How would you go about getting a read on someone's sanity while playing a video game? You can't really keep a track of a player's mental state while they play, but in Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, you can keep a tab on the playable character's sanity thanks to the Sanity Meter. Because of all the crazy things that happen in this game, mainly being seen or hit by some of these weird monsters, the rationality of the protagonist takes a bit of a nosedive. But unlike something like Amnesia where the main character gradually loses it as well, in Eternal Darkness you've got a meter that slowly decreases along with your sanity. Not only are you getting direct feedback about how your character is reacting to the world around them, but if it decreases by enough, the game starts fucking about with you, the player. Clearly, it's only really there to give the developers an excuse to break the fourth wall in all manners of creative ways, but if for the first few times through the rotation of sanity effects you believe that something is actually going wrong with your TV, it looks like they did their job. Some games, when they try and break the fourth wall, start to lose any context behind it. It's almost like, hey, I've got an idea, let's fuck about with the player. However, Eternal Darkness broke it with a plan, and one that works quite well. I like the sound of a measurable descent into insanity. The idea that every small little action is one that you're gonna question. Any game that adds more value to enemies immediately has my attention. I'm serious, maybe because I've played a lot of games that treat bad guys like moving targets with guns or claws sellotaped to them, but any time a game wants me to treat standard enemies as anything more than a series of hurdles, I'm completely on board with that. There's a couple of different ways you can go with this, ranging from choosing how you kill them and the potential for recruiting them to your side, to having the choice of sparing their lives instead of mindless murder. However, one of the best mechanics I've seen imposed on one of the most tried and tested tropes in all of gaming comes from Middle-earth's Shadow of Mordor. I didn't even think I would have touched this game if I hadn't heard of the Nemesis system, something that completely changes how you approach enemies while still maintaining their status as obstacles that are there to hinder your progress. Not to say that sparing the enemies isn't a possibility, but the way that enemies are handled in Shadow of Mordor is nothing short of genius. Which is just as well, because a lot of the publicity building up to this game showed off the pride in the Nemesis system. Effectively, this mechanic allows some enemies to remember encounters with you and interact in such a way that feels like they're more significant within the game than you'd first think. It adds a bit of personality to some otherwise one-dimensional mooks, but where it gets crazy is when we factor in revenge. Not as a plot device, but as a game mechanic. If you die to an enemy, the act of killing you is enough to get that enemy promoted within their ranks, effectively resulting in the acquisition of experience points. Even better, since you're the hero and you respawn after you die, you can track down this promoted enemy and exact your revenge. And as you might imagine, he will remember you. Pretty useful in this game, but just imagine something like this cropping up in another game like Grand Theft Auto. Like you steal a car from a guy and he never forgets it. Now that is dynamism. Gaming fads come about from a variety of different reasons, but strong passion for a game is usually based off something. It's not like it just appears out of thin air for the sake of pissing off people who didn't come along for the ride. Unless you've been living under a rock in a cave on Jupiter, the name Undertale will trigger one of 3 or 4 different reactions, but all of them are reasonably strong reactions. For some, what is a reasonably reserved game was tarnished by the obnoxious behaviour of some fans on social media. And while it's no surprise that Tumblr ruined Undertale for a lot of people, you should see what they've done to feminism, the game under all this obsession was still the best one I played last year. Undertale tries a lot of new things, but only really when put into the context of an RPG. Bullet hell isn't really anything novel, and neither is a pacifist route through a game, but there was one thing that Undertale pulled off that not only got me thinking that other games should try it as well, but also at the time dropped my jaw so far through the floor that it came back smelling of Beijing. I've never seen a game end like Undertale. For one reason or another, Undertale has a few characters who know someone is controlling the playable character. It's not quite as far as knowing that they exist inside a video game, but they're definitely aware of a bigger picture. In some moments, this goes as far as directly referencing the other person who's in charge of the protagonist, but whatever ending you witness, any notion of Undertale having a fall was straight up abandoned on the spot. It doesn't matter if you kill everyone. It doesn't matter if you spare everyone. It doesn't even matter if you achieve some kind of messy combination of neutrality. Undertale knows and remembers what you've done between playthroughs. Which sounds quite helpful from the standpoint of the game remembering what your name is, but the uses of this kind of memory of your save file are far more sinister. At the end of a genocide run, you end up destroying the world, but should you launch the game after that, you're still given the option to start things over again and delete your save file. But that's the thing, it doesn't really. It might feel like you're starting again from scratch, but from that point onwards, Undertale remembers the atrocities that you committed in that genocide run, and taints any future runs with references back to it. It straight up ruins any further playthroughs in subtle ways, but that's the price you pay for murder on that kind of scale. A game that remembers everything. Don't think that they're not watching you. This has been RabbidLuigi, and it is possible to reset Undertale if you dive into your game's save files on your computer, but if you were to replicate this onto a game console, you'd never be able to live it down. You might be able to replay the game again, but the game will always remind you of what you've done. And if you take this opportunity to go for a second genocide run, God have mercy on your soul. Got a topic that you'd like me to discuss in the countdown? Leave a suggestion in a comment below and head over to my Twitter, where I'll be holding a vote to decide the subject of the next countdown based off the best of your submissions. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, hope you liked that. Really glad I got this one out, not only because I like talking about specifics of some games like this, but also because I was running behind on this one. You get to Friday and realize that you've only edited the first 3 minutes. And you can't rush it because the video will suffer, so you just have to work faster, I guess. It's been a busy week. I was awake for 19 hours on Friday. Had to go to the doctor's early in the morning because of a dog bite. Let's hope for an easier week next time. Stay crunchy, everybody.